On the 23rd of June, something rather important is happening. Something that, whether good or bad, is going to change our country. Now, you may or may not know what I think of the government and the rules that they bring in. And as yet, the fact that we haven't had a decent PM for a while is quite worrying. But coming up, the EU. Are you in or are you out? Hi guys, I'm Tony Martin, and whether you are in or out, there is room for debate on this subject. It is something that I feel is now beginning, albeit rather slowly, to divide the country yet again. There are pros and cons for leaving and staying in the EU, but does that decision really lay with us, or will the government yet again do what they think is best for us? Michael Gove has opted for an outvote, saying laws which govern citizens in this country are decided by politicians from other nations who we never elected and can't throw out. And considering we have to pay a large sum for being in the EU as a membership, it could be considered that we are actually paying someone to make our decisions for us. But that said, isn't that what we do with taxes that go to our government? And the decisions they make are not always the best ones. So, with that in mind, jumping ship on the EU could give us a cost saving straight away, as the country would no longer contribute to the EU budget. Now, last year Britain paid in 13 billion to the EU, but we also received 4.5 billion worth of spending, says Full Fact. So the UK's net contribution was 8.5 billion, and that is about 7% of what the government spends on the NHS each year. So could this money that we save be poured back into our system, namely the NHS, and start working towards making the NHS a service that it should actually be? Now, people are saying to me about trade agreements, and if we were to leave the EU, because the EU is a single market in which no tariffs are imposed on imports and exports between member states, I refer to what apparently Sky News has come out and said, and they have said our membership allows us to have a say over how trading rules are drawn up. So if we leave the EU, we lose the right to have any negotiation over them rules. But it would give us free rein to establish our own trade agreements and possibly increase the amount of funds coming back into our country. Now, with regards to funds and our economy, everyone, even the money-saving expert Martin Lewis, says we will be better off. But I have had a look around, and I am by no means an expert, but I know what I see. Open Europe, who is an analysis company, they said, and they have found, that the worst case scenario of leaving the EU and going it alone, so to speak, is that the UK economy loses 2.2% of its total GDP by 2030. Now, if you remember and cast your mind back to the recession of 08-09, that knocked about 6% off UK GDP. So we will be in less of a state economically as we were back then. Now, France has already come out and said that there will be consequences for Britain after Brexit. And after the Brussels attacks, when we were almost beginning to unite, bring in an argument about money, and I feel that everyone starts to change. Now, President Hollande backed up David Cameron by warning that there will be consequences if the UK breaks ties with Brussels. He said, "I don't want to scare you, I just want to tell the truth." Now, there's a first. There will be consequences if Britain leaves the EU. Now, they are asking us to vote whether to stay in or get out. And I feel using scaremongering tactics to ultimately get us to vote in a way that best suits not us the public, but once again the government. They are also using the same subject once again that scares many people in this country, and that's the subject of immigration. Boris Johnson has had his say about Brexit and has stated that leaving the EU would have no impact on border arrangements with France, as this is an agreement between London and Paris and nothing to do with the EU. Now, he has mentioned to the BBC that the current Calais arrangement, by way of an international treaty between France and Britain, and the remarks by both leaders were all part of a strategy to scare people into voting to remain in the EU, which is what the government want. The Prime Minister also announced a £17 million injection of funds to help move refugees from Calais to safe places in France and towards a priority security infrastructure. Now, bearing in mind the Chancellor announced that additional funding would be made available to the NHS as part of a £1.25 billion investment over the next 5 years. Now, while campaigners for funding expected £250 million to be paid this year, the Department of Health announced that only £140 million would be allocated. Why? Why can't the 17 million used to help move the refugees be injected back into the NHS system? That's because we are governed by guidelines on immigration as set down by the EU. Britain cannot prevent anyone from another member state coming to live in this country. The declaration by Cameron every 5 minutes about immigration, I feel, are just said to appease us. It has been said that it will cost the average family $4,300 if we leave the EU. Now, I realise the IMF has said that they may increase taxes, but if we leave, won't we be saving £13 billion? Now, there are arguments for both sides, but ultimately we can only make our own mind up. How will you make your mind up? Whatever decision you make, it will change how we trade, how we travel, and may make the changes to immigration that some of us are urgently asking for. Comment below with how you are going to vote, click on the thumbs up, and as always, click on the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.